As I've mentioned, we do have sufficient members. We've got 3 members of the 5 present, so we have sufficient for a quorum. Hopefully the other 2 members will be able to join us shortly. First order of business will be the agenda. Is there any discussion on the agenda or motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second. I'll second it.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is passed. The agenda is approved. Next order of business is approval of last week's minutes. Is there any discussion on the minutes or a motion to approve?
Making the motion to approve last week's minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. The minutes are approved. Okay, we're scheduled to hear from 2 folks this evening. We will hold tight to the schedule in the interest of being sensitive to everybody's time. The first speaker, I guess, Mark, we're going to get you started a couple of minutes early if you're ready. You're scheduled at 7:05, and then we've got Andy Hill at 7:30 from Farm Bureau. So I guess what we'd like to do, Mark, is hear from you first. You know, what we want to make certain you get an opportunity to tell us what you want to make certain that we, you know, that we hear from you, that we understand from an Invenergy perspective as we do our work as a zoning commission to determine if there are any ordinance requirements that we feel necessary, and if so, what those requirements might be. I'd like to have some time for Q&A. After you, you know, have given your opening remarks, and I would ask, since we do have the other members joining too, so we'll have everybody here. There may still be some questions that folks have afterwards. Will you be okay if we send you some questions in writing as a follow-up if we don't get to everything this evening?
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Any way that I can answer questions and be of help.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I'll turn it over to you now, Mark.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just, as a matter of quick introduction to everybody, the rest of the commission knows that we were inviting folks somebody from Invenergy and Farm Bureau, but Mark Crowell is the project manager with Invenergy for the Worthwhile Wind project that they've been working on, doing some planning for the northwest part of the county. So go ahead, Mark.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks for slotting me in here and letting me be able to speak on the project. As Jeff said, you know, I serve as the lead developer for the Worthwhile Wind project and Invenergy. So I wanted to just kind of come in here today and provide some information on our company's perspective, and then really, you know, I think the Q&A section will be really helpful. But generally speaking, and on a broader note, as regarding wind developments in a county and protections or ordinance related requirements, the company and the project too, you know, is not opposed to a given type of ordinance, you know, one that's potentially workable, that strikes the right balance between what would be some feedback and important to the local community there, and then also doesn't stifle or in kind of a backhanded way maybe dissuade or prohibit development of wind projects in an area. So really, we're just looking for something that's a reasonable middle ground, that's backed by things that are factual and just like scientific review of these things, or studies, or backed by information like that. And so with that though, we are at the same time, we're kind of working through an idea of a development agreement with the county supervisors. And I think using that as a template is for this discussion, and what kind of the numbers and distances that I would necessarily propose here are in line or better as other Iowa counties in the state. And so it's setbacks or considerations that are fairly conservative and provide a greater degree of protections for Worth County citizens and residents than is already in place. So with that, something in or near like a 1,500-foot setback from residences. It's what we've talked about with the local community to date. 1,500 feet is where what we propose for the the development agreement. In addition to that, I think in part of having some just some distance between a given turbine location and a residence, there's some following benefits that come with that. Some things that folks will be concerned about in varying levels around a project, and one of those being a noise or a sound standard. Having something that is workable but responsible and respectful of neighboring residences and properties is important. I think 50 decibels is what 50 dBA is what we had proposed in the development agreement. For context, from my analysis, that would be the most stringent noise analysis of, if you kind of viewed it as an ordinance, of any ordinance in the state of Iowa. So something that kind of is right on the line of being protective and also workable. And then with that, there's a flicker standard as well. So that's kind of the third prong to an approach that we kind of looked at that will mitigate any sort of nuisance to a high degree practicable. And so with the flicker standard, we did 30 hours per year. So again, to kind of put that into context, that's holding the project in a given location to a standard of 99.7% of the time there will be no shadows on a given residence. And so those things are I think a really good group of numbers to work at. It kind of hits to the core of what what some of these ordinances are meant to do in part when it's pertaining to wind ordinances, like the wind aspect of it all. And think that those are the right blend of something that's conservative, would be a really forward-facing standard for Iowa, but then also doesn't prevent the development of projects with stringent setbacks that are outside of that aren't necessarily backed by any additional context. Because I think when you take all of those in, you take all of those together, and that gets kind of the combination of protections that folks in a county or a given area would be looking for. So you've got a 1,500-foot setback. If for whatever reason at 1,500 feet you can't hit that 50 decibel noise standard, that turbine location would have to be moved or shifted to meet the noise standard. And same along with the flicker standard as well. So you use those things as a minimum to be able to then kind of work together what responsible siting would be within the bounds of something that's reasonable to provide protections for the local folks as well. But I have some information regarding each of those things. I just I think that is really just kind of a point to start with. I would say the Iowa Environmental Council is a good place that shows information pertaining to other ordinances in the state of Iowa, shows what other places have done, kind of put some rationale behind, why a certain standard or not. And then, if you're just kind of looking for ways to check into what I'm saying, kind of what the Worthwhile Wind Project's perspective is, that these are, truly conservative standards. But, I'll kind of open that up here for questions, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
I guess I've got just a couple of questions on some of the items you had noted. And then I'm sure some of the other members are going to have some questions as well. So you talked about the 1,500 foot residence setback. That's based on what? I mean, it's certain size turbines should have that kind of setback. Different size turbines have different setbacks. What, can you go into that a little bit? I mean, to date, I think most of the turbines that have gone in the county, they're not exactly the same size. They're generally the same tower height. I think there's some differences in the size of the blades in some of them. So the total heights are different in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned during the supervisors meetings that you haven't selected turbines yet for Worthwhile Wind, but they might be some of the larger ones, larger than what's gone in thus far.
Yeah. So a 1,500 foot setback is reflective of a forward facing project, similar to what the Worthwhile Wind Project would be proposing. So if you look at other projects in the state, you'll see that the setback requirements are for counties that have ordinances is lower. And so you'll see anywhere from 1,000 feet to 1,200 feet or so, and or maybe 2 times the tip height of the turbine, kind of a combination of those things. Again, it is a little bit of a protection from all those things that I had mentioned previously, and that if you get a certain distance away, given the relation to the size of a given turbine, you mitigate any sort of potential interference with neighboring properties, or just general impacts to any dwelling in the area. And so then when you kind of look at the prospect of the Worthwhile Wind Project and what would be somewhat reflective of any future project in the county, would be that this larger 1,500 foot setback is more reflective, but still in line with some of the ideas of what those distances were before. So
okay, Mark. So to clarify, are you saying the counties that have less setback have smaller windmills? I think the question was kind of, if I understood it, is the size of the tower determining what you guys come up with for setback?
Yeah, in a
formula or a standard or some examples?
Yeah, there's not a formula. There's not necessarily a standard either. That setback distance will somewhat grow as the projects continue to get larger.
1,500 foot for us, and other counties are smaller.
Yeah. So let me ask Mark. Maybe we can. Certainly there's going to be more conversations on this, but. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that if we have differing sizes of wind turbines, and there's a specific, here's the physical setback, that may be appropriate for one, it may be more than necessary for another, it may be not enough for another.
Sure.
Do you think that an ordinance that describes X times the height of the turbine would be appropriate? I know there's a number of ordinances that actually use a combination of those things, where they say X amount of distance or X times the total height, whichever is greater. And that kind of accommodates a variety of different turbines that may come in as the sizes change. What are your thoughts on that kind of a concept?
Sure. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense, really, because even in the sense of a worthwhile project as an example, that is, again, kind of reflective of how when projects are developed overall, is that you'll design and come into a project with kind of a span or a host of different sizes. You have an idea,
Mhm.
but you don't know until you get to the end exactly what that would be, or until you get really further along in the process. And so,
Right.
something that was, similar to other counties in Iowa, maybe 2 times the either 1,500 feet or 2 times the tip height of a turbine, whichever's greater, like you had mentioned, would be something that, makes a lot of sense to me, as long as the multiplier, again, is kind of in the reasonable range as well.
Right. Yeah. So it occurs to me that the physical setback may have been an initial reaction, if you will, on the part of some of the ordinances to try to manage sound and flicker. And since then, we've gotten a little bit more articulate on those things, where you mentioned, having specific flicker standards in an ordinance and having noise standards in an ordinance. So with a noise standard, do you think that those should be design standards and measured standards then as well? And by that I mean that the energy company would be required to show the design is designed so as not to produce more than whatever the sound limits are. And then
Sure.
once it's in place, it would actually be able to be measured to make certain it was compliant.
So you definitely, you see that in some of the neighboring states, like state permitting processes. You'll kind of have to have that accompanying information along with any sort of permitting application. And so that's actually what we'll propose to do here as well with the Worthwhile project. And that I think that some of the concerns, at least, again, using Worthwhile as an example, is that there's right now we don't have specific locations to look at. People are, have concerns that, X, Y, and Z may happen when, we haven't put anything out there yet. So we haven't put,
Right.
turbine locations, or any information like that. So anyway, to kind of tie it back into to what you had said, I think more information here is actually helpful and is a good way to strike a good balance here. So Worthwhile project, if it was something that was a 50 dBA noise standard, then you have to, show the actual location, show a study that shows that will be met by all of the locations, and then do a post-construction study that then confirms that that's the case. We don't have any problem with that. I think that's just I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. One final comment from me on the sound piece. You mentioned the 50 dBA. A lot of literature points out the difference between the decibel reading with the A filter and the decibel with the C filter, and how the C filter picks up a lot more of the lower frequencies, which are what it seems to be a lot of people complain about, is that lower frequency whoosh. Do you guys have any experience with the DBC sound levels and limits?
So
Recommendations on that?
So we do the recommendations based on a dBA level. I think that is an industry standard, something that's that is very well agreed to. I can't necessarily speak to DBC in an extreme level of detail. I can tell you about the general kind of the general concepts, if you're looking at DBC or infrasound or some of the other, some of the other things that you see around, and kind of why, there's not necessarily any sort of health concern or issue related to that type and level of sound. But, we
Yeah,
can
even
always,
just from a nuisance, I mean, even a nuisance
Yeah.
perspective, the lower frequencies,
yeah,
that lower frequencies tend to carry farther,
Mhm.
particularly in certain atmospheric conditions. They tend to carry farther than the higher frequencies. And that's why I was wondering about the DBC.
yeah,
So, okay.
I
Well,
don't
we
want
can
to,
explore that one further. You said that you're not really prepared to talk about that right now. So,
yeah, I can
Um,
get some information on it too, maybe send it around if that would be helpful. Try and
Good.
find something, or maybe point to, somebody that knows a greater deal than I, that I don't want to,
Sure.
I don't want to give you any inaccurate information.
Yep. I've kind of capitalized on the time. Todd, David, Dana, Justin, you guys have questions for Mark?
Yes. Give me an example of 50 decibels. Is that a lawnmower?
So I mean, so that's going to be anywhere between like a fridge running in your home and or like an air conditioner outside. And in kind of general context as well, 30 to 50 dBA is heard with just typical agricultural activities, whether it be high windy areas where the wind is ruffling past different features in the area, rustling corn, rustling different types of crop. And so a 50 dBA standard in that light is very conservative. For another kind of context too, and I use this when my watch is working. I have an Apple Watch. It's like dead all the time, so this only works on occasion. But when I'm sitting here talking, if I was kind of hold it up in front of my face, it would be 70 to 50, and so or 70 to 80. I'm sorry, and then levels after that, obviously are going down. So that gives you an idea, of the stringent level of a 50 dBA standard.
Thank you.
And
Dana, you got any? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, and just one other item as well is it just the way that the dBA standard on sound works is it's not like 70 dBA is not I'm gonna blank on the term here, but 70 dBA is actually 100 times louder than 50 dBA, and then when you go again, it is actually from 80 dBA down. From a sound level, it's actually 1,000 times quieter to go from 50 to 80. So it's a large drop off as you continue to drop down on the decibel levels.
Yeah, so the numbers represent a curve, not a straight line graph.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Interesting.
Justin, have you got any questions for Mark?
No, the only thing I was going to bring up is because we're on the south edge of them, and as you alluded to a little bit with the barometric pressure, as that changes, you get a lot more rotor wash than a standard pressure. So, do you know that 50 dBA is that measured at a certain barometric pressure, or is it just whatever you decided to test that day?
Yeah, so we would do the pre and post construction study based on kind of a window of time as well. So we'll set up various receptors, or a wind project that set up various receptors in an area to get a true spread of what that would be, and then do the calculations and analysis for pre and post based on a range of data. So not just kind of picking a single spot.
So you'd be
Okay,
able to
thank you.
isolate for any particular site what the sampled ambient noise level was?
We would do that as well. Exactly. So you'd have
Okay.
a baseline of what it was like before, with nothing there, a standard of, what those noise levels would look like at distance for a given turbine location, and then go and confirm that afterwards as well. And then just one other, item just relating to sound is a lot of the issues pertaining to sound, whether it be, sound levels in general or the lower level infrasound that you kind of hear around or hear folks talk about. There's a multiplying effect that happens when there are multiple turbines in a given area. And so if you look at the existing projects that are in Worth County, they are smaller turbines, Jeff, like you mentioned before. You have a higher likelihood of more turbines on a given section, more turbines in a given area or around a given residence. Having that creates some of that multiplying effect that people cite as, as their concerns with the project. So while a newer project like a Worthwhile, people do look at the turbine height and, the larger turbine, with a little bit of concern. There's some, there are benefits with having larger turbines that are spaced out more, that have lower impact on a given portion of land, and then also lower the risk of that multiplying factor to happen. So then when you have that, just by the nature of how the project needs to be designed, coupled with a setback and a noise standard, you have something that, works really well for, a project that wants to do things responsibly like we do, and then given the protections there for local residents.
Okay. Right, good. We got probably just a little over a minute before we got to jump off of Mark's time. Any other questions for Mark?
Yeah, you mentioned residential distances. Is there some other examples, other than airports, where you guys have ran into different distancing?
Meaning, how do you mean with airports? Like,
Well,
with,
obviously you got to stay so far away from an airport, but you spend a lot of time talking about how many distance from residents. Is there any other circumstances that we should be aware of, that we should be, campgrounds? Obviously.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a whole host of different, we use internal design setbacks as well. Obviously being like the areas that are the most critical and or, where you want to provide a ton of oversight is a residence, right? Because folks are living there, but we'll have setbacks from any type of grouping that could potentially be a habitat, any types of setbacks from roads as well. Typically we use, 1.1 times the tip height of a turbine for, a setback from a road. And, kind of a combination of those. So a lot of ours are self-imposed setbacks on a given project or dictated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll kind of step back away from those things, along with, having to get FAA determinations and those, like you mentioned, to make sure that we're not going to be interfering with any sort of air
Super.
traffic.
So do you have setbacks
Right.
set for churches or
Yeah. So,
campgrounds or anything like that?
yeah, I'm sorry, Todd. We're going to have to
Okay.
cut Mark loose and move on to Andy. We'll be able to provide some follow-up questions to Mark. We'll just put them in writing and send it to him. So capture that thought, capture that question. I think suffice to say, Mark has said that, there's a variety of things that would be appropriate for setbacks. We just need to work through and identify what those areas are, what those setbacks are appropriate. So to that end, Mark, if you've got those kinds of design standards that you would recommend, if you want to forward those to us, that'd be fine. And we will put together a series of follow-on questions as folks have them and get those to you. That said, we're going to close the part of the agenda with comments from Mark with Invenergy. And we're going to turn now to hear from Farm Bureau. Andy Hill is with us. As I understand, Andy, you're the district rep for the county, for the County Farm Bureau. So with that, we'll turn the floor to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And for the purposes of this discussion, I know there's several people on here that don't know me. I'm sitting here before you as a representative of the Worth County Farm Bureau. I joined Worth County Farm Bureau's board in '92. I have a certain amount of institutional knowledge. When Jeff reached out to the Worth County board, they had a discussion and recruited me to serve as their liaison today. I, as Jeff has mentioned, have a new role within Farm Bureau for the past 4 years as a district director. That means that I am elected from the membership to sit on the board of directors at the state level. I represent 11 counties in that capacity. But tonight I'm sitting before you as a member of Worth County Farm Bureau, a farmer at Manly. My residence actually sits at most of my farming operation resides within the extraterritorial zoning of Manly, which does extend 2 miles outside of Manly's city limits. So I've had zoning here at my place for some period of time with a complete different commission and board of adjustment from the Worth County Commission. So I appreciate that. I had the opportunity to read Jeff's email invitation yesterday and understand that you're in a fact-finding mission. I assume you'd like to have a perspective from Farm Bureau. In order to give you that perspective, I need to spend about 4 minutes to talk about the policy development process of the Bureau. That's a grassroots process. The members bring forward issues in issues surfacing. Then those issues are compared across the state, and people say, you know what, that's a topic we should look at. And right now, one of the topics that our membership is going to be looking at over the next 3 or 4 months, and possibly setting some policy in September, relates to zoning, and that's extraterritorial zoning, annexation, whether an 80-20 annexation rule should be put in place, those kind of things. So zoning is a topic right now within the Farm Bureau policy development process. As a state, we currently have, and I'm going to switch screens here, a couple of items in policy related to zoning, and I'll get to wind, and it's part of this. We have 4 pieces of policy active in our policy book. The first, which is going to be the oldest, so I'll work in chronological order. It is our opinion that a county zoning board or commission should only include residents who live within the jurisdiction of their zoning. By state law, that was in 2018 that we passed that as our policy. In June 1 of 2020, the legislature passed a law that actually aligns with that policy we adopted. And in the counties with zoning, the commission is only to be made up of people outside the incorporated areas, and that needs to be in effect by May 31 of 2021. Two policies we currently have in our policy book relating to wind and solar. One is, it is our opinion that siting and setback rules for wind and solar farms should be determined by the state. That's our opinion. That's the way we would have it if we were able to have all the decision makers decide to have one set of rules across the state. The second one would be wind and solar farms should be taxed similarly according to structure and output. Currently, I don't know if you're aware, the 2 different taxation methodologies there are for both wind and solar, and they put them quite at odds. The last one relates to, and those wind and solar were adopted in 2020, and so that actually would be September of 2019. and for the 2021 year, which would be September of 20, goes to zoning. Counties should have the option of determining whether county zoning should be adopted. If zoning is enacted, the county should control the location of residential dwellings near agriculture districts as a way to reduce nuisance suits. We're opposed to any attempt by counties to regulate the use and construction of agricultural buildings, structure, land, when used for agricultural purposes. I give that to you as a little bit of background of current events, where we're at. Obviously, there's an ag bias. We understand that there are ag exemptions. Johnson County has been in the news for what they've tried to do over the past few years and the legislation that's been enacted because of that. Now to straight on to local conversation. As items come up, the Worth County Board will meet ad hoc, bring it up at one of their monthly meetings whenever it's deemed necessary, and talk about the topic. Had the opportunity to sit in on Worth County's meeting with the supervisors a couple of weeks ago. And that was a meet and greet. The topic of wind came up. And in that conversation, I will share with you an assessment of the room. So this is not a policy. This is an assessment of the room, the opinions that were shared from the board members around the table. So it does not reflect the resolution of the membership because the question hasn't been asked. But the sentiment was there should be some sort of standard put in place for the setbacks, whatever that might be, address issues related to tile, of course. How does that happen? What happens at the end of their useful life? How is that funded? All those kind of topics came up, and around the room there was a general sentiment, and I'm going to shake my head because that's kind of what was going on around the room. The topic of zoning came up, and I'll just give you this as a tidbit. There was great resistance to transitioning Worth County from partially zoned to completely zoned. We're one of the 3 counties that's partially zoned, which means we're one of the 25 counties that are not completely zoned. And with that, the last thing I'd like to say is that I would like to suggest, just as a farmer down here at Manly, that you look at what Kossuth County did not so long ago, applying an ordinance outside of their zoning that is under the auspices of the supervisors. I know that that was a huge conversation. I heard farmers over in Kossuth County, because that's one of my counties. I go sit in on their meetings. It was a long conversation. There were several public meetings. There was, of course, prior to the decision, neighbor versus neighbor, similar to what we're hearing here. And after the supervisors passed that, it sure seems to have made things better in Kossuth County. So I'd encourage you at some future date, if you need the URL to Kossuth County's website that shows that ordinance, I can provide that in the chat if you'd like that. If you already have it, that's great. With that, Jeff,
Yeah, we've got it.
stand for question.
Yeah, we've
I'll
got
work
it,
on
Andy. We've
Great.
looked at a large number of them. I have one question. You, I believe you stated that it's Farm Bureau, one of the policies that wind ordinance should be managed by the state as opposed to counties. I thought I had read when the Iowa Utilities Board was looking last year at doing that very thing of bringing that stuff underneath the Iowa Utilities Board. I thought I had read a brief by that Farm Bureau had submitted that I'm trying to look at my notes here, that said that they felt that the control should be local, that control was better served local as opposed to statewide.
I will read to you chapter and verse from our policy book. This would have been adopted, so you can timestamp this. I don't know where you're reading that from. This would have been adopted in September of 19 for the 2020, starting with the 2020 legislative season. And it is. the
Okay,
opinion-
yeah, that would have been afterwards, because I think this was May or June. It was when the Iowa Utilities Board had asked for comments on their proposed rules for governing statewide wind development. It was a submittal by Farm Bureau at the time, and I can get you the details on it, but I believe that was May or June. So the policy that you're describing may have been after that. More current.
Correct. Right, and so the voting delegates, at the direction of the membership in September of 19, passed a policy that reads, siting and setback rules for wind and solar farms should be determined by the state. So that is our current policy. That's what
Okay.
the way I have to answer the question, Jeff.
Okay,
Jeff, if I
Yeah.
may, I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself.
yeah, I'm sorry, Scott, that it's not a public it's not a public hearing. It's a public meeting. So anybody is free to listen in, but it's a meeting of the zoning commission and invited speakers. If you'd like to get on the agenda.
I was just
Okay.
going to clarify the IUB's rulemaking. I actually submitted comments, and you're correct, Farm Bureau had urged state control, and IUB closed that rulemaking without making any
Right.
decision. So.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to get through that because I had a note on that, and I just wanted to make sure. Okay. And Andy, I just want to make sure you said that the Farm Bureau policy is that the county should control zoning, but not as it relates to ag. You know, that the state law prohibits zoning from impacting agriculture. The ag exemption in the state law says that if what you're doing is in the production of agricultural goods, then the zoning ordinance doesn't apply. So it wouldn't apply to, grain bins and maintenance sheds and things of that nature.
Jeff,
That's
Jeff, I have an appreciation for what you're trying to tell me. I would like you to know that once ordinances are put in place, that there can be incrementalism. There can be those that would like to push an agenda. And I'm going to bring up Johnson County again as an example. They tried some really interesting ways to use their zoning to regulate agriculture. And I understand the agricultural exemptions are out there. Ultimately, it distilled down to you had to prove to the zoning administrator, commission, board of adjustment. I'm going to lump them all together. You had to prove that you were agriculture each and every time you submitted a building permit. Ultimately, after a tremendous amount of volunteer work by a whole host of people on both sides of the issue, the legislature slapped Johnson County in a big way. With furthermore, they're talking about you cannot do that. And so Johnson County becomes the whipping boy within the ag community for what they've done. In January, the Johnson County, I believe it was the zoning administrator, utilized drones to fly over farmsteads for the purposes of enforcing ordinances. The golden child of that is a 90-something-year-old resident of the rural area of Johnson County that had more vehicles than the zoning says that you can have in a condition that aren't drivable. And he was given a letter to fix within 14 days, just as the polar vortex was hitting us in late January, early February. So that whole topic is what perks our ears up. We understand that Johnson County is what it is, and it's one of 99, and the other 74, if you will, don't have stories like this, but it's because of the bad apple that we continue to restate the policy. And Jeff, I understand your perspective. I understand the intent, but there can always be something that go awry, and that's why we continue to reinforce it in our policy.
Okay. And you brought up Kossuth, and it's just one of several counties that took the approach of having a renewable energy or commercial wind, or in some cases private and commercial, to a wide variety. But it's essentially a standalone ordinance separate from zoning that addresses those things. And you're suggesting that that is something that Farm Bureau would be in support of or supporting of?
I will tell you that the board members that sat around the table with the supervisors did a lot of this when that was happening. Whether or not we put it before our membership as a policy piece, it comes back at a 51-49 or a 90-10. I can't say that, but in that meeting with the supervisors, there was a lot of this going on.
Right. But I guess just in short, it wouldn't have the opposition at the same level as countywide zoning. Is that an accurate statement?
I would suggest to you, you've got the sentiment correct.
Okay. Okay.
I have to hedge it, tell you that's sentiment, that's
Yep,
observation.
understand. Yep, understand perfectly. Any other commission members have questions for Andy?
Todd, I'm really glad to see that you're able to get on a Zoom a second week in a row. I believe it was you that said that last week was your first one. You can
Yep.
tell with my background here, I sit for Zooms quite a bit over the last year and have figured out how to do a virtual background. There is a phrase for people that sit in the chair too long on Zoom, and it's called Zoom butt. So my hope for you is that you don't get Zoom butt.
Well, I'm gonna get Zoom elbow because I gotta hold this phone up. I don't have a holder yet.
Well, there you go. Todd, Justin, David, Dana, do any of you have a question for me?
Andy, I got a question for you. So,
Okay.
what do you see in the counties that you cover? What do you see as the reasoning that they'd prefer the setbacks to be state mandated versus local mandated?
So that's a conversation less about the 11 counties here, and it's more of a conversation that happened back in that September of 19, I believe it was when it was, that there needs to be some uniformity. You all are doing the best job you possibly can with the resources available to set some numbers. In theory, we would be able to engage a more knowledgeable group. I'm not trying to take anything away from you, but a more knowledgeable group to get a more inclusive, comprehensive list of setbacks. Todd, you brought up, so if it's a cemetery, if it's a campground, is that a different setback? If it's got a different power nacelle on it, if it's got different blade length, all those pieces, I don't know the answers to that. I'm just pulling things out of my piece of paper here that shows the Kossuth County ordinance. Justin, it went to try and have experts engaged on what proper setbacks would be. And then probably the more important thing is you're not having counties fight each other 10-foot difference on setbacks so that Winnebago gets them all instead of Worth County. Creates a uniformity.
Okay, thank you.
Dana, I think this is probably the first time you've seen me. I hope that I haven't been too boring. I needed to be give you a little bit of background as to who I am. Todd, Justin, David, they all know me, and Jeff knows me. Do you have any questions for me?
Not right now, no.
Thank you.
So, Andy, just with regard to wind-related ordinance, so without regard to what form that ordinance the Board of Supervisors might ultimately pass, the content of the ordinance, what are your three biggest concerns or desires that we should consider with regard to commercial wind-related ordinance?
It's an obligatory setback. I have to say setback because that's the neighbor versus neighbor thing. Second, from an agricultural perspective, is drainage tile, those things that affect the land from a productivity standpoint. And the third would be, how do we get rid of them? Who's going to pay for it? Who's responsible? Is there truly an indemnity fund or an escrow fund that is set up on the front side so that if that tower is decommissioned, it's not on the back of some poor slob that gets that piece of property? Those would be my three things if I had to say three, and they're off the top of my head, Jeff.
Okay.
You've got farmers in this group. They're going to reinforce that.
I'm gonna speak as a
Yeah, I
non,
just didn't know if
can you speak to more of that tiling aspect?
So Justin can probably talk about it. Todd can talk about it. The worst infraction was over in Barton Township, from what I've heard. As they bring their equipment in, Dana, you know what drain tile is for ag land. As they bring their equipment in, it's so big, so heavy, it crushes the tile. It might be that year. It might be 4 years, 5 years out before one understands that the tile's damaged. Well, now we need to get someone in there and fix it. And typically the fix isn't brain surgery, but it needs to be done. It needs to be done right. Over in Barton Township, when that group was engaged, they hired a single excavator that got up here periodically. And then when they were here, they tried to do as much as they could. And it wasn't until locals, whether it was, help me out with Kensett and Northwood, Abrams and Peterson, and those
Holland.
people.
It was Holland.
Holland
Jeff,
came and fixed it.
Yeah, Holland out of Forest City.
So it took someone more local, more responsive to come and fix it. Ultimately, I don't know what the contract says or how long. It would be my opinion, if there's ever a tile problem related to the maintenance roads or the construction of the tower, it's on the back of the utility that owns them, builds them, whatever. And it's always going to be their problem associated with the easement. That would be my opinion. Dana, I don't know if that answers your question.
is there a time period that repair should be affected, Andy?
It's as soon as it's identified, it should be done as soon as it can be, and it should be the responsibility of the easement holder until the easement is no longer there. That's an extreme view. That's my view.
But I was just wondering, so if say early spring, right after planting, it was discovered that there's a tile problem, should that be fixed within months, weeks, wait until after harvest? What kind of time period?
I'm going to give you a hedge answer. At the discretion of the landowner, whether he wants to destroy the crop or not, but it must be fixed before the next season. If you find it in season, it has to be fixed before the next season, and at the discretion of the landowner if he wants crop destruction to fix it. Justin will weigh in on this.
Yes, so Kit definitely will. On the ones that we dealt with compaction problems for 10 years, and that compaction problem was based on the cranes moving, and The cranes at that time went wherever they felt like going. It was the shortest distance and they didn't care what they ran over. And so, yeah, you would 3-4 years down the road, you would find blowing tile just because they crushed it the first year and then it just kept breaking.
Okay.
We're not going to find damaged tile this year. That it needs to rain in order for us to find them. And then once it rains, you know how we're finding them.
Right.
Dana, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and maybe just to follow up that we need to do some additional research is there language in like Cassuth County's ordinance for this already?
I believe there was a tile quote in there.
Yeah, there's in the variety of ordinances that we've selected as potential models. I think there's a number of them that can give us some decent language. Andy brought up some points that I've not seen in any of the 34 that I've read that discuss multiple years having gone by before the damage is identified. I think they're pretty silent with regard to time horizons on that. And we'll have to have other discussions on, well, how does one know what actually caused the damage, 1, 2, 3 years after the fact?
Oh, it's no question that what it is. There will be disputes as to what it is. If they've got an easement, they need to be responsible. Nonetheless, I know my time is short. I would like to interject, as you're looking at the possibility of doing an ordinance for renewable energy, please consider putting solar in it now and be done with it.
Okay. That said, we are just about at the end of the time. So if there are any additional questions for Andy, we'll collect them. We'll send them off to you and give you something to respond to if we have some follow-up questions. Otherwise, thank you for your time. I guess so we'll close that part of the meeting. The last thing that we have on our agenda is just to run through next week's agenda with the commission members, and then we'll call for a motion to adjourn. So right now we have scheduled, I did get confirmation that we will hear from county conservation, and we will hear from the Kossuth County zoning administrator who works in the engineer's office, and then we'll hear from Worth County engineer. So that is on the agenda for next week. Anybody have anything else we should consider for next week's agenda? It'll be a full one. Okay, that said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, all in favor?